Hello. Good day everyone. Welcome to another discussion here in our subject Introduction to Psychology. I hope everyone's doing well. Today we are going to talk about psychological disorders, and by the way, ito na yung last topic natin for the term. Time flies so fast, parang kailan lang nag-discuss ako ng first topic natin, and today will be our last topic. And just as you can see on the screen, this is part 1 of our discussion, which means there is another part of this lecture para hindi masyadong mahaba yung discussion natin. So, for the first part of psychological disorders, let's start this by recalling a moment in your life where you encountered or witnessed someone who is mentally ill. Nakakita ka na ba ng isang taong may mental illness, or maybe you interacted with someone with mental illness? I want you to recall that moment. And then, for the second bullet, pwede rin namang I want you to recall of a news item where you heard or maybe you've read that involves someone who is mentally ill. Anong balita yung narinig mo na may kinalaman ng isang taong may mental illness? And for the third bullet, I want you to recall a movie, whatever that is. I'm sure marami makakaalala nito, no? Movie that you watched in the past that had something to do with mental illness. Okay? So I want you to recall those moments in your life. Now, the reason why we are activating those memories of your encounters with mental illness is because we want to answer this question first. What does it mean to be mentally ill? Pag sinabi mo na yung isang tao merong mental disorder, or this person has a mental illness or a psychological disorder, ano bang ibig sabihin nun? It means in psychology that that person is thinking and behaving too differently compared to other people. Those two words are very important in the way we define mental illness, too differently. Masyado kang kakaiba. Now, I want you to recall those stories or those moments in your life that we just did a while ago. The reason why you consider these people mentally ill, it's because they have something in them that makes them too different from the majority. The way they think, very different from the majority. The way they behave, very different from the majority. Sobrang kakaiba sila compared to the normal population. So, we label them as abnormal. The word AB, diba, sa abnormal. The prefix AB here means not normal. What does it take for you to be considered not normal? If you are not like the norm. You are too different from the norm. In fact, we can connect this to statistics. Sabi nila, all qualities of human beings can be represented by the normal curve. Let's say IQ. Mag-start muna tayo sa IQ. Karamihan daw ng mga tao, the normal population, most of us will fall within this area of the normal curve. Around more than 50% of the population will have a normal IQ. And then, some segments in the population will fall below average or above average. Okay? Pero merong mga tao, ito na yung kinoconsidered na abnormal, too different from the majority, the 2.5%. So the 2.5% here in terms of IQ are people with extremely low IQ, while people in the right side here are people with extremely high IQ, yung mga gifted. Nagigets nyo? So that's what it means to be not normal or abnormal. You have characteristics, psychological characteristics that are too different from the majority. And that is what psychological disorders have in common. Kaya nga natin sila kinonsider na mentally ill or they have psychological disorders because they have patterns that are too different from the norm. Take for instance people with Down syndrome. In what way are they too different from the majority? Well, unang-una, of course, physical, iba sila. Kasi merong mga genetic, may mga genetic conditions dyan that makes them look that way. But we don't focus too much on the physical when we talk about psychological disorders. They are different compared to the norm in terms of their learning ability. Hirap na hirap talaga silang matuto compared to the normal population, and their emotional control. The way they handle their emotions, especially the negative ones, is very much different compared to how normal people will do it. At times, they become very impulsive when it comes to these negative emotions, which most people can easily control. Okay? Kaya sila sobrang kakaiba compared to the norm. Another example of a mental disorder that will illustrate my example would be psychopathy. In what way psychopaths are too different from the majority? They have an intense desire to kill. Hindi naman kasi normal yan eh. Normal people will not have a compulsion to kill someone. Most of us, when we wake up in the morning, the first thing we do are normal things. We pray, we brush our teeth, we think about our quiz, we think about our online class, we think about the coming weekend. These are normal thoughts. But people with psychopathy, when they wake up in the morning, the first thing in their head is, sino kaya yung pwede kong patayin today so I can make myself happy and feel accomplished doing this? Now, that's not normal. Diba? That's why this condition, psychopathy, because it contains that pattern, it involves that pattern of wanting to kill someone in an everyday basis, in a regular basis, is considered a mental disorder. Is that clear? So the key word here is too different. Masyado kang kakaiba compared to the norm, that will push you or that will make you go to the label abnormal. But let me just give you a word of caution here. Hindi porket iba, ibig sabihin mental illness na. We can still tolerate certain degrees of differences. Like, going back to the normal curve, yung sinabi ko kanina, ayan, no? So, ito yung norm. People are alike. Majority of people are alike in a certain psychological quality within this area. Okay? But there are certain differences that you have na iba sa normal population, but it's still acceptable. Like, if you fall within this area, the below average or the above average, in a way, people can still tolerate that difference. Now, if you are here in this area, it doesn't mean you are already mentally ill. Because again, although you're different from the majority, you are not too much different from them. And we can tolerate that. Diba? Usually, psychological disorders fall around the extremes of abnormality. You are too different from other people. Let me give you a specific example to illustrate this. The tolerance of difference. Let's say in one barangay, everyone is using spoon and fork to eat food. And then there is one neighbor, there is one family within that barangay who uses their hands in eating food. Does that mean abnormality? Does that mean psychological disorder? No. Maybe it's a cultural preference. Maybe ganun talaga sila pinalaki ng mga magulang nila, kumain sila using their bare hands. You see? So although they are different from the majority, that difference is tolerable. Okay lang yun. Kasi yung ibang tao naman talaga ginagawa yun. Kumakain ng nakakamay lang. Okay? So that difference is tolerable. Now, contrast this to another example. Let's say, all of us, whenever we are thirsty, pag tayo ay uhaw, we drink water in a glass coming from a clean source. So maybe we have water purifiers, we have boiled water from the ref, no, para to satisfy our thirst. Now, imagine there is this family wherein they drink water from their toilet bowl. That's where they pee. Right? And then, For them, the water in the toilet bowl is the same water that they drink. Is that tolerable difference? I'm sure many of you will say, hindi. Sobrang iba yun compared to the majority. Now we can sense some disorder here. Unless you can spot some cultural explanations why they're doing that. Pero kung wala, talagang trip lang nilang ganon, then maybe we can sense that there is a certain disorder here. Alright, so that's the point in this slide. Hindi porket iba, mental illness na. The difference has to be very, very different. It has to be very extreme compared to the normal population. So the keyword here is the word extreme. Okay? The reason why I am emphasizing this is because I don't want you to be very quick to judge. That once you see a person different from other people, sasabihin mo na kaagad, oh, mental disorder. That's wrong. You have to be very, very careful in judging about how different a person's behavior is compared to the norm and calling it a mental disorder. In fact, if you are not a professional, you should not be even doing that. Diagnosing people of mental disorders wherein you are not even a licensed psychologist. Later, we'll talk more about that. Alright? And by the way, in connection to this, also later as we go along, I think I'm going to discuss this in part 2, no? Those behavioral differences that are too extreme from the majority also have certain criteria to be considered abnormal. So, hindi porket yung mga behaviors mo ibang-iba sa majority abnormal na, the differences, those behaviors must contain certain criteria that will confirm that those behaviors are considered mental disorders. More about that as we go along. Alright? So I want you to pause a little bit and think about the things that I've said about the definition of mental illness. Now let's move on to answer the second question, why people become mentally ill. Okay, some people are psychologically well, maganda ang mental wellness nila, maganda ang mental health, but there are some people who are psychologically ill. What could be the reasons why they became like that in the first place? So if I'm going to put that in a diagram, here's the diagram that represents that question. Okay, so people are mentally ill because there's something wrong with their psyche. But may explanation yan. There are reasons why this psyche went wrong that led to mental illness. What are these psychological forces here that can damage the psyche that leads to mental illness? Number one, I think one of the most common explanation is brain damage. Kaya ka nagkakaroon ng mental illness because a part of your brain is damaged. Take for instance, intellectual disorders, which in old terms, nung unang panahon, in history, it's called mental retardation. But take note, this is already considered politically incorrect term. Don't use the term mental retardation today. It is now considered offensive. So if you see people with this condition, you just use the term ID. Intellectual disorders or intellectual deficiencies. These are people with extremely low levels of IQ. Why are they like that? Well, one reason is there is a part of the brain or series of parts of the brain that are damaged that inhibits them, that stops them from learning easily. They cannot get things easily. It's very hard to teach them. So when they have this condition, usually they need to go to special education. Hindi nila kayang sumabay sa normal universities and colleges or high school. They need special kind of teaching. Again, why are they like that? The origin can be prenatal. Maybe while they are developing inside their mother's womb, merong nangyari in their brain development that may explain why those parts of their brain are damaged. Another example would be psychopathy or the serial killers. Bakit ba ang isang tao nagiging psychopath? It has something to do with their brains. Studies after studies have shown, for example, that people who are psychopaths, their brains behave differently compared to the normal brain. Specifically, there are parts of the brain that handles emotions that are behaving differently compared to the normal brain. Yung part ng brain nila that is controlling emotions is literally dead. It's literally not lighting up when you take a look at this in MRI. So kapag hindi gumagana yan, ibig sabihin, this explains why whenever they do what they do, which is killing, they don't feel any guilt, remorse, or fear. They are so confident doing that behavior because the parts of their brain that should be telling them it's bad, that should be telling them it's not good, it's literally dead. So it's a brain problem. They do those things because something in their brain is not going well. Alright? So one lesson we can learn here in connection to this idea that brain damage can explain mental illness is we need to ensure healthy prenatal development. Because during prenatal development, this is the foundation of brain development. If something goes wrong within the brain development of the child inside the mother's womb, it will be translated or it can be translated to certain psychological disorders when this child goes out from the womb. Such as, yun na nga, intellectual deficiency or psychopathy. Kaya dapat yung mga expecting parents, yung mga buntis, even the husbands, you should be very knowledgeable about the right prenatal care. Okay, don't self-medicate. If you are feeling something, always see your doctor. Because whatever you ingest, whatever you do while you are pregnant may have certain effects in the brain development of the child. And if you are not careful, you might be causing this child to suffer from a certain form of a mental disorder. Another lesson we can learn in connection to this is we need to protect your brain or other people's brain. I hope you realize how important na iniingatan natin yung quality ng ating brain. That's why our brain is protected by a very thick skull because it tells us that that part of our body, the brain, is very important because any damage that the brain suffers can be translated to a certain psychological disorder which will affect the quality of your life. Alright, so please protect your brain, and the best way, one of the best way and easiest way to protect your brain, alam nyo kung paano? Well, guess what? Don't take drugs. Especially college students like you are very prone to try out drugs. There are times you will be pressured in college to take drugs. Itatry nyo lang naman, not a biggie. Don't even think about it. When you encounter people like that, asking you to take drugs, try it out, what you do is you run away. Because when you ingest these drugs, when you take these drugs, the illegal drugs, this is one sure way to damage your brain. This is what happens when you are stubborn, matigas ang ulo mo, and you take drugs. Okay? So you take drugs, it enters your physical system, and it damages your brain, which contains your psyche. Okay? Remember the connection between the brain and the mind, although they are two different things, but they are very related. They are very intimate. So when you damage your brain, there will be certain effects in your psyche that can lead you to have certain forms of mental illnesses. Some effects that drugs can give you are the following. Pwedeng magkaroon ka ng uncontrollable sex drive. Sobrang taas ng sex drive mo. You have a busted emotional control or poor impulse control. You have a lot of emotional outbursts that lead you to do a number of negative behaviors. You end up hurting yourself or even other people. Pwedeng magkaroon ka ng lack of rational thinking. You are no longer thinking straight. You are no longer thinking about the consequences of your behaviors because you can no longer see the effects of your behaviors in the future. Or hallucinations. which again can lead you to do stupid behaviors because you are seeing things that don't really exist. Again, bakit naging ganyan yung psyche mo? Because those drugs, those chemicals that you let your body enter, you let the drugs enter your body, damages your psyche. And that may explain why, boom, you read the newspaper and you read these headlines, now you wonder, how come these people are able to do this? Sa Tagalog, paano nagagawa ng isang matinong tao yan? Sagot, hindi kasi matino yung tao. This person is suffering, these people are suffering from mental illness caused by brain damage via illegal drugs. So please, don't even think about it. Protect your brain by not taking drugs. The second reason why people become mentally ill can be genetic. Sa Tagalog, namamana ang mental disorders. In fact, there are a number of psychological disorders that are clearly established to have genetic basis, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Alzheimer's disease, Down syndrome, autism, or even clinical depression. Posibleng yung isang tao, pinanganak siya, meron na siyang genetic predisposition to have these conditions. And these conditions will be further reinforced, will be further activated if that person is placed in a wrong kind of environment, such as a stressful environment. Diba? Nasalahi nyo na nga yung depressed. Halimbawa, namana mo na yung depressive gene. Tapos, nandoon ka pa sa depressive environment. Lahat ng tao galit sa'yo, nakaka-stress yung environment, nakaka-pressure. The more this genetic predisposition for depression will show up. Bottom line, a person can be mentally ill because that person genetically inherited that from the relatives or from the parents. So one lesson we can learn here is one way to get to know your mental health, if you really want to be deeper in your understanding of your own mental health, please be aware of your family history. Kasi posibleng meron kayong mga nararamdaman psychologically and you don't know where it's coming from. Takang-taka ka, bakit ang dali-dali mong ma-feel bad? Maybe it has something to do with your genes. So ask about your family history. Ano ba yung mga psychological conditions ng mga kamag-anak mo? Psychological conditions ng mga ancestors mo that will add to your understanding of your own mental health. This is a very good exercise to do. Being aware of the family profile, family psychological profile. Okay, so alamin nyo yan. If you have time, please research about the psychological conditions of your relatives. The third reason why people become mentally ill, so again, let's review what's number one. Genetics. Number one is brain damage. Number two is genetics. Number three is environmental. There are certain external forces out there na sa environment natin ang pwedeng makakos ng mental illness. Like for example, why do you think some people have what we call body dysmorphic disorder? These are the people who have extreme hatred, extreme negative perception of towards their body. Ayaw nila yung katawan nila, galit na galit sila sa katawan nila, napapangitan sila sa katawan nila. Okay? Whenever they look at themselves in the mirror, they see an ugly face. Kahit hindi naman talaga ganyan yung face nila, but in their perception, in their perspective, pangit sila. And by the way, this tendency can start early. Even children can suffer from this. In fact, this can be the origin of, let's say, eating disorders. Bakit may mga taong may body dysmorphic disorder or eating disorder? Answer, culture. There are very high cultural standards when it comes to beauty. The culture makes people believe that to be beautiful means to have this kind of body, especially for the female population. Ang galing-galing ng kultura na mag-set ng standard on who is beautiful or what is a beautiful body. And a lot of these standards that the culture sets para ma-hit mo yung word na beautiful, physically beautiful, is very high. Almost impossible to achieve. And so these poor young girls becomes so pressured, so stressed achieving that pressure or achieving that standard para lang masabihan silang maganda sila. And they will be willing to do anything just for them to achieve that standard. Magpapasurgery nang hindi naman kailangan, 'di ba? Obsessed na obsessed sa kanilang mga body weight. Again, at such a young age, this can start. Ayaw na ayaw nilang nag-gain ng weight. And so, how do they respond to this? They do all the things that will lose their weight. Diet, exercise, hindi na kumakain ng tama, hanggang butot balat na lang. Okay? Butot balat na nga, unhealthy na yung weight. Tumingin sa mirror, feeling nila mataba pa rin sila. So, the more they want to lose weight until it can lead to death. Where did that come from? Cultural standard of beauty. Another example would be post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. Why would a person suffer from PTSD? Definitely, this is not inborn. Wala akong kakilalang baby na pinanganak na meron na siyang PTSD. Usually, something happens in the environment that is so traumatic, that is so stressful, that led to the development of PTSD. One good example of this would be what happened in America, specifically in New York. Remember that? Yung Twin Towers nila, World Trade Center, bumagsak because of a terrorist attack, 9/11. Did you know that a lot of Americans up until today who had a direct experience in this dark period of history, up until today, they suffer from anxiety and panic attacks. A lot of them have anxiety disorders. They panic every time they hear noises. They panic every time they see people. Every time they are near these buildings because they remember that past negative event. That's PTSD. Oh, saan galing yung PTSD? Because of this event. Something external to us. Now, let's not take for granted in connection to external forces that affects or that can give us mental illness, let's not underestimate the power of the music that we listen to. External force din yan, di ba? Sa panglabas yan eh. Pinapapasok mo lang yan sa mind mo by listening to the music. Now, given that, please be aware that there is a very direct link between the kind of music that you listen to and your mental health. Studies after studies have already established that your mental health highly depends on the kind of music that you listen to. Specifically, ang sinasabi ko dito in connection to our topic today, unhealthy lyrics is being absorbed by your psyche, which can compromise or which can give you certain forms of mental illnesses. Actually, it's not the sound that affects your mental health eh. Kasi 'di ba yung iba sinasabi, yung rock music kasi malalakas diyan, maiingay, masama yan sa mental health mo. Leave the music alone. It's not the beat, it's not the noise, it's not the tempo, it's more on the words. It's more on the words that you hear when you listen to these kinds of music. Because those lyrics that you listen to, nilalagay mo yung earphones mo dyan sa tenga mo, 'di ba? Something psychological happens when you do this. Those words that you listen to from the music enters your psyche, and your psyche absorbs those messages that you listen to. Okay? Halimbawa, karamihan ng mga rock music, sorry for people here na mahilig sa rock music. But let's face it, a lot of messages being reflected in rock music are psychologically unhealthy, very negative, full of bitterness, full of anger, full of negative emotions. Again, not all, but majority is. The norm of rock music is negative feelings put into words. And the more you listen to these kinds of songs, your psyche absorbs those negative lyrics and it begins to affect your mental health to the point that it can lead to a certain form of a mental disorder. Take for instance, one song written by Linkin Park. Alam ko medyo luma na yung example ko, but there is this song written by Linkin Park entitled Waiting for the End. Let me read for you. Waiting for the end to come, wishing I had strength to stand. This is not what I had planned. It's out of my control. Flying at the speed of light, thoughts were spinning in my head. So many things were left unsaid. It's hard to let you go. Now, if you read the entire song, the entire lyrics of the song, you will come to a conclusion that this song is about suicide. It's not about another person. Yung sinasabi niya ditong it's hard to let you go, it's not another person. The you here is himself. He is contemplating whether or not to kill himself. Again, you read the entirety of the song so you can see what I mean. See for yourself kung ano yung mga sinasabi dyan sa lyrics ng kantang yan. See? It's very depressing. And these words, again, will endanger your mental health. It can give you mental illness. Let me put that in a diagram para maintindihan nyo ano yung nangyayari, no? So you listen to the unhealthy song lyrics and then your psyche absorbs that. Imagine the person who is listening this kind of song, meron na siyang depressive gene. You see the interaction here between the environment and the genes, no? So itong taong to na mahilig sa Linkin Park, meron na siyang depressive gene. Inherited from the parents. Now, this gene, if you have it, it's either turned on or off depending on the environment. Alright? Depending on the environment. Now, let's just say that it's off. It's off because before this guy listened to Linkin Park, he is living in a good environment. Churchgoer, good friends, good music, positive messages, right? Until this person got exposed to Linkin Park at nagustuhan niya yung kanta ng Linkin Park. Now, this person listens to Waiting for the End. Now, what happens? That unhealthy song lyrics will turn on this depressive gene that used to be turned off. Okay? Na-absorb niya yung lyrics ng Waiting for the End. Now, he becomes familiar with depression. Now, he becomes familiar with suicide. Nagising sa Tagalog. Nagising yung depressive gene niya. And what will happen if that depressive gene gets turned on? Boom! The unhealthy song lyrics turns on the depressive gene, which can lead now to certain forms of mental illness. Now, this person can be diagnosed with clinical depression. That if left untreated can lead to suicide. Kaya magtataka pa ba tayo kung bakit marami mga rock music icons, a lot of them suffer from forms of mental illnesses. Specifically, Chester Bennington of Linkin Park. I'm not saying that he committed suicide because of the songs that he sang. I'm sure marami pang mga complex reasons yan, but you cannot deny that the kinds of music that he sings is a big contributor to why he did what he did. Malaki ang contribution niyan sa kanyang poor mental health. Ano kasing klase mga kanta yung kinakanta niya? Lalong-lalo na vocalist pa siya. That's his role in the band. To internalize the songs that they write and sing it to the public. It took a toll on him. It took a toll on his mental health. When he internalized all those messages within his psyche, boom. Hindi naging maganda yung epekto sa kanya. So again, another example going back to this model, no? Again, another person, meron na kaagad siyang depressive gene. Got it from the parents. It's currently turned off. Kasi maganda yung environment. But this person listens to pop songs that contains unhealthy song lyrics. Those lyrics coming from pop songs which contain unhealthy messages can again turn on that depressive gene and can lead to the development of certain mental illnesses such as this song. Halimbawa, depressed ka. Meron kang tendency to be depressed. And then you underwent a breakup. And then while you are grieving because of the breakup, you listen to this song. Tell me, how am I supposed to live without you? Now that I've been loving you so long, how am I supposed to live without you? How am I supposed to carry on when all that I've been living for is gone? Oh my goodness, these are very depressing words. Diba? Nakaka-depress yung mga words na yan. It's a song about hopelessness. It's a song about helplessness. You keep on listening to this song while you are grieving for the breakup. It's just a matter of time before that depressive gene becomes awake. That can lead to a certain form of mental illness. Ako, ang tansya ko dyan, depressive disorder. Clinical depression yan. Sige, kaya ang sagot ko dito, listen pa more. See? So I hope, knowing this, knowing the power of the songs that we listen to, how they affect our mental health, ang response natin dapat dito, we become really careful, we become very conservative in terms of what kinds of music that we listen to. Okay? If you value your mental health, if you don't like to develop certain mental illnesses, let's be conservative. Let's screen out. Let's analyze the lyrics of the songs that we are listening to. Because our mind absorbs these words and it affects our mental health big time. If you want to know more about this, the specific processes, how music affects the mind, and what are the outcomes when we are careless about the kinds of music that we listen to, I highly recommend you watch a video that I created in my YouTube channel entitled Music and the Mind. This is a short lecture explaining the process, how the music affects the quality of our mind. Okay? Kung gusto nyo lang naman. Kung ayaw nyo, hindi wag nyo panoorin. But I highly recommend you watch this. This will be very helpful for you. Okay, in summary, these are the sources or the reasons or the factors why mental illness is developed. Number 1 is brain damage. Number 2 is because of genetic reasons. And number 3, because of environmental forces. Take note, mental illness is developed as a result of interactions among these three. No, hindi yung brain damage lang causing mental illness, genetic factor lang causing mental illness, environmental factor lang causing mental illness. They are interrelated with one another. And in clinical psychology, that kind of thinking where we acknowledge the roles of these three in the formation of mental illness is called the biopsychological or biopsychosocial approach. You see the parallelism between this slide and this one. Psychological disorder is caused by a number of the interacting factors around biological influences, psychological influences, or even sociocultural influences. It's actually both the influence of internal and external forces, kaya tayo nagkakaroon ng psychological disorder. Kaya meron itong direct application eh. One direct application of this is one way to analyze a person's mental disorder, where it's coming from, what's triggering it, is to analyze the person's internal world and external world. It's not enough just to explain a mental disorder from the outside or external world. Aalamin mo rin dapat yung internal world ng tao. Ano ba yung mga bagay na tumatakbo sa isip niya that contributes big time to his or her mental illness. You see? And that's what we teach you in clinical psychology. How do you interrelate the internal forces and external forces for you to come up with an accurate explanation how a certain disorder is developed? No? Pinag-uusapan din yan in abnormal psychology. But going back to this slide, okay, so what? Now that we know the sources of mental illnesses, brain damage, genetic factor, and environmental forces, one application we can do in connection to this is now we have an idea how to prevent or how to deal with mental illness. Right? In what way? In what way can we deal with mental illness in connection to this? We go back to our previous lesson, which is on mental health. So you go back to those habits that you need to be doing to maintain your mental health, it will help you in the same way when a person already has mental disorder. Diba naalala nyo sinabi ko in that lecture that when you keep on doing this, number one, what does it do? It will prevent you from developing mental illness. But guess what? These three, let's review: positive reframing, gratitude, and serving others. These habits can also help people who already have mental disorders. Siguro hindi totally mawawala yung mental illness, but a person with mental illness, the more they do this, it will benefit them. In what way? The intensity of their symptoms will be lessened, will be declining. Imagine a depressed person. You train that person to apply positive reframing. You train that person to express gratitude. You train that person to serve others. Again, siguro hindi totally mawawala yung depression niya, but there will be big improvements. Maybe the intensity of sadness will be lessened. And take note, going back to the going back to this model, the biopsychosocial approach. I am not saying that all you need to improve mental illness is these practices, these habits that I talk about. No. In connection to that model again, although the habits will help, a correct way of treating mental illness must always involve other preventive strategies. So hindi lang dapat puro ganyan. In a way, minsan kinakailangan din ng medication to pacify the emotions, to stabilize the emotions. Because for example, you don't use this, right? You don't use medications. A person cannot do any of this if the mind is so clouded with negative emotions. So what we need first is to help this person stabilize the emotions through medication. Kahit counseling 'Di ba? Hindi naman kahit anong counseling mo sa tao, kung yung isip niya malabo, hindi niya magigets yung mga sinasabi mo sa counseling. So we need the help of medication talaga. So medication, and then once the mind is already stabilized, then we go to these strategies. Alright? Or even, again, going back to biopsychosocial approach, minsan hindi lang sapat yung medication, hindi pa sapat yung behavioral therapy. Minsan kinakailangan mo rin ng drastic change in the environment to really help the person recover from mental illness. Like for example, minsan kinakailangan talaga natin ng batas, legislation, to help people improve on their mental health. That's why our president already signed the Philippine Mental Health Law within his term. Are you familiar with this? You should be familiar with this. In fact, this will be one of your assignments, no? You will be reading sources on the Philippine Mental Health Law. It is a law designed, number one, to help people prevent developing certain forms of mental illness and help people who already have mental illness become better. O, di ba? That's a very drastic change in our environment na kailangan pa natin ng legislation dyan. O. But I want to take this step further. Again, what are the possible preventive strategies? Could be the following: behavioral or cognitive approaches, positive reframing, gratitude and helping others, pwedeng medication, pwedeng legislation, but please don't underestimate the power of spirituality to deal with mental health. After all, remember our very first lesson, I mentioned that psychology came from the word psyche, which means the spirit or the soul. So when you say psychological disorders, the soul is sick. Logic, the disease of the psyche must have spiritual solutions. Kasi yung may sakit yung psyche, the non-physical, yun yung may sakit. Di ba? Kung yun yung may sakit, ano dapat yung solution mo? Non-physical din. It involves spiritual solutions. Makes sense. Right? And we cannot deny the fact that spiritual solutions contribute big time to the improvement of our mental health. Even psychiatrists have established this. Mga psychiatrists na yan. These are doctors. These are believers of synthetic medicines in connection to mental health. Sila mismo ina-acknowledge yan that medications are not enough to really help a person deal with psychological disorders. Let me read for you the statement coming from the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Spirituality and psychiatry, on the face of it, they do not seem to have much in common. That's the traditional view. Magkalaban daw ang spirituality and psychiatry. Magkalaban daw ang Biblia at ang science. Wrong. But we are becoming increasingly aware of ways in which some aspects of spirituality can offer real benefits for mental health. That's already the trend today in the world of psychiatry. Even in the world of psychology, we are slowly realizing the fact that the spiritual condition of a person has a lot of thing to do with that person's overall mental health. Kaya wag nating i-underestimate yung power ng mga spiritual activities in dealing with certain forms of psychological disorders like worship of God. Did you know, studies show that people who worship God na talagang with sincere faith towards God, they have better mental health. Their mental condition improves. Ang dami ring mga researches on the power of prayer in connection to mental health. Reading the Bible, having Bible studies, being connected with other Christians. We call that fellowship. A lot of studies are showing that these spiritual activities contribute big time to a person's mental health. Now, I know some of you will ask me, sir, bakit meron din namang mga studies na nagpapakita na yung mga taong gumagawa nito, lalo pa nagsasuffer sa mental health? Ang sagot ko dyan, it's because for these people, they have an inaccurate view of what it means to do these things. Because for you to enjoy the benefits, the psychological benefits of these activities, you have to see these things in the right perspective. Like the way you view God. How do you view God ba kasi? In the first place, why do you worship God? For what reason? Did you know that there is a correct reason why you need to worship God? If you have that correct reason, you have the right perspective of worshiping God. That will benefit you psychologically. On the other hand, kung mali kasi yung pananaw mo sa worship, it's very inaccurate. You worship God because of this and it's wrong. Now that can backfire. Now you suffer mentally because you have a wrong motive in worshiping God. See? If you want to know more about this, I want you to watch my video again in my YouTube channel. Hindi ko na lang nalagay dito, no? But I created a video where I differentiated intrinsic religiosity from extrinsic religiosity. You watch that. Most people who enjoy the benefits of these spiritual activities in connection to their mental health are intrinsically religious. Very different from people who are extrinsically religious. And in the Bible, if you read the pages of the Bible, it highly recommends that when we do spiritual activities like this, we must be falling under the category of intrinsic religiosity, not extrinsic religiosity. What's the difference? You watch my video. Alright? So to close this part 1 of our video, the following are the summary points, the big ideas. Number 1, mental illness is real. Hindi lang ito gawa-gawa ng tao, hindi lang ito puro pang movie. There are real people out there suffering from certain forms of mental illnesses. We need to acknowledge this. Number 2, there are markers of mental illness. May mga simptomas yan, merong mga signs that a person will be that a person is mentally ill. In the next video, I'm going to further elaborate on this. Number 3, there are presence of mental illnesses that must be formally diagnosed, which again, I'm going to discuss in the next video. And number 4, interventions will help big time. Alright? So, hindi porket meron kang mental illness, you are already a victim of that. Wala ka nang pwedeng magawa. Remember kung ano sinasabi ng biopsychosocial approach? Once we are able to identify the sources of psychological disorder, from there, we can develop strategies to help people manage better their mental illnesses. So we are not completely helpless from this condition. And this is good news. Diba? Especially for those of you who are already suffering from this, you can do something about this to make these things, to make your condition better. Okay? So that ends the part 1 of this video. In our next lesson, I'll talk about the part 2 of our discussion on psychological disorders. Thank you everyone for listening. Have a great day and God bless. Bye-bye.